Good evening. Welcome to the Pandemic Podcast. In breaking news, vaccine passports have just been approved in England. I've been watching the debate all afternoon, and the third motion on the bill today was COVID passports or COVID certification, which has just received approval in England following a lengthy debate. So far, there's 4 votes being made. I've actually got the final vote is yet to pass. We'll join the House of Parliament live. I'll bring up the footage as we go through this. The final vote of the day is going to be on whether the vaccines will become mandatory in the NHS. But so far, the vote has been passed unanimously for the extension of the mask mandates by 441 votes to 41 on the extension of the mask mandates. That was the first vote. The second vote was the dropping the requirement for those who are fully vaccinated to isolate in favour of daily testing. It's not clear what it means for the unvaccinated. Presumably, the isolation rules remain. And then the vaccine passports. Whilst there was much more opposition, they passed 369 votes to 126. So we will now have vaccine passports in England from Friday. Now, having watched the debate, I mean, firstly, much of what we see talked about here in the House of Parliament is based upon ideology as opposed to evidence and facts and a firm grasp of the situation. Nonetheless, what is most shocking is that many of the MPs themselves quite clearly state that they're aware that the vaccines won't stop transmission, and therefore the vaccine passports are in many ways irrelevant as a result. But they've been approved on the basis that the get-out clause of the lateral flow test has been included, which has led to several really interesting discussions, though not surprising, that many of the MPs have started to say we shouldn't call it a vaccine passport, we should call it a COVID certification or a COVID pass, given the inclusion of the lateral flow test, which many seem to have not recognised that this is now very much a paper society. Now, of course, this is limited to a set venues at this point in time. It's the standing venues of capacity 500 plus. But as we've seen across Europe and indeed other parts of the UK, it's rare for the items on the menu to stay the same, so to speak, in that these passes have regularly been extended beyond the initial intended venues. And of course, right now the hysteria around Omicron has taken its grip, and throughout the entirety of the debate, the hysteria of the Omicron variant was quite palpable. Although there was some pushback on several cases, namely the revelation from South Africa that it seems to be around 29% less severe at this point from early data. But the reality is we just don't have significant data on this. But the early indications show that this appears to be more of an endemic phase. One of the MPs quite rightly, or several of the MPs quite rightly, pointed out the flaws in the modelling, the imperial modelling that has created these projections of what could happen with Omicron, given it seemed to be more transmissible. Now, if you recall, every single variant that we've heard about since last year has been described as more transmissible, as a source for hysteria. But we've lost sight of what really matters, which is how severe is this thing? Because if you have something that's incredibly transmissible but has very minimal impact on the human body and our health, resulting in minimal severe symptoms and minimal hospitalizations and deaths, then why would we be concerned if it was more transmissible? Now, I'm not saying that that's the case with Omicron at this stage, but certainly appears to be moving towards that endemic outcome. Yet this is clearly driving, the hysteria is clearly driving the ideology within the House of Commons today. But it was it's palpable to see that the discussion was really built around political platitudes and propaganda more than solid evidence and facts. It's clear evidence that pandemics and politics do not mix. This discussion in the House of Parliament is basically two parties battling it out to uh, be seen to do the right thing. Where we of course do live in a society where being seen to be righteous is more important than the act of being right itself. This kind of virtue signaling that comes with the culture that we live in extends to politics in the sense that we see this political posturing in order to win the popular vote based upon the fears. And several of the MPs, including Desmond Swayne, in his impassioned speech, spoke in depth about the twisting of the fear in order to put these policies forward. But of course, despite this being improved, the shocking thing is the MPs recognise that it's not going to be effective in reducing transmission. And the hypocrisy, of course, is that the vaccine passports or COVID passes, however you want to describe them, the fact that you now have the LFT, the lateral flow test, the negative test as a possible option, means that essentially what you're doing is creating a situation where someone who is double or triple vaccinated can enter into a venue without testing themselves for their current infection status. And of course, remember. Oh, here we go. So the vote for the vote for the NHS mandatory vaccinations is about to come. We'll watch this live now. So the final vote of the day, which we're about to witness now, is the vote on whether the vaccines will become mandatory in the NHS. There were some really strong debates against mandatory vaccination in the NHS today, which is really positive. But of course, that was pretty much met with we need to find different forms of propaganda to persuade and educate people about taking the vaccine. This was the overarching sentiment that choice, quite rightly, should be remaining, but it seems that they're looking for different ways to force people against their will to take the vaccine, which is a subject in itself that we won't go into depth today. But it's positive at least to see some MPs at this stage standing firmly against mandatory vaccination, but we've already seen it pass with the care homes, with thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs being lost. Let's see in a few moments' time what the verdict is going to be here with the NHS vaccinations. You're watching live here on Parliament TV through the Pandemic podcast. Apologies with if you got slight choppy feed tonight, given the inclusion of the external link to the Parliament Live TV, where the final vote of the day is shortly going to pass, or otherwise, on the motion of mandatory vaccinations within NHS. So whilst we await that final vote, just to further comment on the COVID status situation, someone who's double jabbed or triple jabbed can enter a venue carrying the infection. Whereas the person who enters with a negative lateral flow, whilst the lateral flows obviously have their own flaws, at least is some form of sound check. Just checking you can hear me now. We're back live. Are you able to hear the sound now? Just give me comments. Let me know in the comments if you can hear me. Still can't hear me. No sound. Okay. So it looks like we've got some problem on the broadcast. I'll come back to this. Yes, we got no sound. Back. Okay, you've got me working. Fine. Apologies for that. So we had, if you just saw that, we've just had the vote. We've just had the vote. The NHS mandates have now been passed. So that's dreadful news now that the MPs, despite firm resistance, didn't have the courage to go through and stand against that. So we've got the renewal of the mask mandates, extension of the mask mandates, the COVID passports or the COVID certification vaccine passports have been enabled in the UK, in England now, and the NHS vaccine mandate bill has passed. So this is a dark day for England in terms of its liberal values. This is a real assault on liberty in our nation, despite the MPs acknowledging that vaccine passports would play an insignificant / no role in reducing transmission. These things have passed, despite many of the MPs recognising the devastating effect this will have on healthcare through the NHS mandates. They've still passed, which shows that we really do have a battle on our hands. This begins to change the relationship between the state and the people. And personally, I think revolt is the only option here. The message is not getting through to the MPs. There's very fundamental, but there's so many assumptions that are flawed within this. For instance, the vaccine passports themselves and all these mandates are predicated on the idea that pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic spread play a significant role. Much of the evidence shows this is not the case. So if you're building policy on a flawed set of foundations or a flawed set of assumptions, then they're always going to be faulty. So I've got a lot more to say on this issue. I'm going to broadcast again tomorrow. I have to move on now, but for this evening. But thank you for tuning in. Breaking news: vaccine passports approved in England. I'll be back tomorrow to give full comment on this. But mark your diaries. This Saturday, London. There is going to be a huge march against Plan B. We're standing against Plan B, the COVID certification, the NHS vaccine mandates, and all of the nonsense that has followed the Omicron variant so far. We're standing up for Plan 3. So please join us in London on Saturday. It's likely to be the largest march we've seen in recent history. It's likely to trump any of the marches that we've seen to date across the last 2 years. So make sure you do what you can to be there. It's important that we now make our voices heard. On the 18th, this Saturday, London, it's time to say no to these people. So I'll be back tomorrow. Good evening to you. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't already subscribed to the Pandemic Podcast, please do so. We do need to make sure that we can reach you. We've got some campaigns that we're about to launch in the next few weeks. We've also got a brand new community initiative that we're bringing out soon. So you just go to danjgregory.com/pandemic. I'll be back tomorrow to give full comment on this situation, but to bring you the breaking news. Sadly, vaccine passports have been approved in the UK, as have the NHS vaccine mandates. So devastating news this evening. But we must continue to take action and fight back. And this begins by attending the protest in London this Saturday from 1 p.m. From 12 p.m. I believe, from Parliament Square to march through the streets of London to make our voices heard. So please do join us on Saturday. We'll be there, the Pandemic Podcast. Let's make it the biggest march yet. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll be back again tomorrow to dissect this fully.